Hello everybody, Jeremy Dickinson here. Thank you all for watching. So in this video, what I want to do is continue discussing Harry Frankfurt's 1969 essay, Alternate Possibilities and Moral Responsibility. And this is part 2 of my video series on that essay. So you recall in part 1, I did some conceptual work. I defined alternate possibilities, I defined moral responsibility, and then I discussed the very famous principle of alternate possibilities principle that Frankfurt is challenging in this essay. So what I want to do now is just recap the principle of alternate possibilities, discuss Frankfurt's very general strategy in challenging the principle, and then go into some detail in describing the specifics in how Frankfurt claims that the principle of alternate possibilities fails. Okay, so the principle of alternate possibilities, you recall, is an agent is morally responsible only if she could have done otherwise. In other words, an agent's morally responsible only if she had alternate possibilities available to her. So many take this to be a commonsensical principle, a necessary principle, a principle that's obviously true, one that we can take for granted in our reasoning about things. But Harry Frankfurt wants to claim that this principle fails. Before discussing Frankfurt's general strategy for challenging the principle, keep in mind what the principle of alternate possibilities entails. It entails that if an agent couldn't have done otherwise, or if an agent doesn't have alternate possibilities open to her, then she's not morally responsible. She's not morally blameworthy or praiseworthy for what she has done. So that's just some recap on the principle itself and a brief discussion of what the principle entails, which should be pretty clear. Frankfurt's general strategy is going to involve arguing that, as you know, perhaps from reading the text or by my part 1 video on this video series, Frankfurt's going to argue that an agent can be morally responsible even if she couldn't have done otherwise, even if there are no alternate possibilities open to the agent in question. So that captures Frankfurt's general strategy. The more specific strategy is to develop a counterexample. Frankfurt's going to be in search of a case that serves as a counterexample to the principle of alternate possibilities. So it's got to be a case, let's be clear here, it's got to be a case that establishes that an agent is morally responsible, yet could not have done otherwise. Those of you who know the Frankfurt, those of you who've read the Frankfurt, perhaps seen other videos on the Frankfurt, you know that he devises a series of Jones cases in order to try to find the right case that's going to challenge the principle of alternate possibilities. And so what we'll do is we'll look at those 4 cases in turn. But what I want to do initially is just set the stage for thinking about those 4 cases. And what I want to do is look at a passage or two from the Frankfurt before we get to the cases to set up those cases themselves. Okay, so again, big picture, Frankfurt's going to be challenging the principle of alternate possibilities by working his way towards a case that intuitively establishes the moral responsibility of an agent, even though that agent could not have done otherwise. And here's what he claims in section 2. I'll be reading from a collection of essays by Frankfurt, The Importance of What We Care About. You can otherwise find the Frankfurt piece online, doing a Google search or going to your university or college JSTOR database. So here's what Frankfurt claims. This is in section 2. I can't give you the exact page because I'm reading out of a collection, not the original published essay. The principle of alternate possibilities may derive some credibility, this is early on in section 2, from its association with the very plausible proposition, the very plausible claim that moral responsibility is excluded by coercion, is excluded by force. Frankfurt claims it's not right, however, that it should do so. The fact that a person was coerced or forced to act as he did may entail both that he could not have done otherwise and that he bears no moral responsibility for his action. Okay, so let's maybe provide some detail here. Supposing someone is coerced because they're being held at gunpoint. What Frankfurt's saying here is that if that were to happen and the person were under sufficient psychological duress, for example, that event may entail that the individual in question could not have done otherwise. There's no alternate possibilities open to that person in that case. It may also entail that the person bears no moral responsibility for what the person does. So if the person's held at gunpoint and tells a lie or does some other thing that harms an individual, etc., that person may bear no moral responsibility for doing what she did. Right? So the idea here being held at gunpoint is one of these sort of psychologically debilitating events that could occur to someone that would mitigate, offset, completely eliminate responsibility. Frankfurt continues. But his lack of moral responsibility is not entailed by his having been unable to do otherwise. Okay, so in a case where someone's held at gunpoint, they're being held at gunpoint and coerced in the situation, and thus the fact that they bear no moral responsibility isn't entailed by the fact they couldn't have done otherwise. So it's just not because in those cases of being held at gunpoint that an individual can't do otherwise, that they bear no moral responsibility, Frankfurt claims. So you see how this is setting up for the Jones cases, the cases that are going to try to establish that the principle of alternate possibilities fails. The doctrine that coercion excludes moral responsibility is not correctly understood, in other words, as a particularized version of the principle of alternate possibilities. I think what Frankfurt's getting after here is that we might be thinking that the principle of alternate possibilities is true because we have cases in mind where agents are coerced. So when an agent is coerced, they thereby lose the ability to do otherwise, and we then think that, the reason why in cases of coercion an agent is not morally responsible is because they lack the ability to do otherwise. And Frankfurt's claim here is, guess what? That's wrong. Okay, we're making a bad inference when we make such inferences. So let's continue with the Frankfurt. Let us suppose that someone is threatened convincingly. So the example of being held at gunpoint was like my personal example, but right, it can be applied in what Frankfurt says. My case was planting seeds. Let us suppose that someone is threatened convincingly with a penalty he finds unacceptable, and that he then does what is required of him by the issuer of the threat. We can imagine details that would make it reasonable for us to think that the person was coerced to perform the action in question, that he could not have done otherwise, and that he bears no moral responsibility for having done what he did. But just what is it about situations of this kind that warrants a judgment that the threatened person is not morally responsible for his act? And you can imagine Frankfurt saying, is it because the person couldn't have done otherwise, or is there something else that's going on in these cases? Okay. And we know what Frankfurt's going to say. It's not because the agent couldn't have done otherwise. It's going to be something else. Okay. This question, he continues, may be approached by considering situations of the following kind. So this is setting up those Jones cases. There's going to be 4 of them. Jones decides for reasons of his own to do something. Then someone threatens him with a very harsh penalty, so harsh that any reasonable person would submit to the threat, unless he does precisely that, and Jones does it. Okay, so we'll be looking at cases that follow that form. The first 3, there'll be 4 of them. The first 3 do more exactly. The 4th, there'll be a little tweak on that bit, but the first 3 at least will follow that form. So let's just talk about the cases. I'll stop reading because I think we can intuitively understand them. So the Jones 1 case. Jones, he's made up his mind. He's deliberated and he's decided to do something. And let's fill in some detail here that's not found in the Frankfurt, but will help us, I think, understand what's going on in the Frankfurt. So Jones 1, he's decided to rob the bank. Okay, he's decided to do so. He sets out to rob the bank. And as he's going into the bank, he's threatened. Someone outside the bank has him at gunpoint and says, "Rob the bank, Jones." So Jones 1 goes in and robs the bank. Why does Jones 1 rob the bank? Well, it turns out, we stipulate the details here and then see what the moral verdicts are when thinking about the details. Turns out that Jones 1 acted on the basis of his own decision, his own deliberation. The threat did nothing to him. The threat didn't affect him at all. This is the kind of man Jones is. In this way, Frankfurt says he's unreasonable. He's not like the rest of us who would have been moved by the threat to act. So is this case a counterexample to the principle of alternate possibilities? Frankfurt says no. Why? Because he's morally responsible. Jones 1 is morally responsible for robbing the bank, but he could have done otherwise. Okay, given the kind of man he is, given the fact that he's not moved by threats of this kind, serious threats of this kind, Jones 1 could have done otherwise. We have no reason to think that he couldn't have done otherwise. So it's not a counterexample to the principle of alternate possibilities. What about Jones 2 case? So let's build up to Jones 2. So there's Jones 2. He deliberates. He decides he's going to rob the bank. So there he is. Goes to the bank to rob it. On his way in, he gets threatened by someone at gunpoint. "Rob the bank, Jones 2. Jones 2 goes in and he robs the bank, just like Jones 1 did. But on the basis of what did Jones 2 rob the bank? Turns out, when we stipulate that Jones 2 robs the bank because he was overtaken by the threat, completely overridden by it. He even forgot that he had decided to rob the bank. That's how fractured he was by the threat. In that case, when we stipulate that, it seems like we don't yet have a counterexample to the principle of alternate possibilities. Why? Because Jones 2 isn't going to be morally responsible for what he does, because he was completely overridden by the threat. He was coerced by it. So Jones 2 isn't going to serve as a counterexample, because we need a case, remember. Let's make sure we're clear here. We need a case where Jones is morally responsible, but he couldn't have done otherwise. In the Jones 2 case, he's not morally responsible. Okay. In the Jones 1 case, he's morally responsible, but the other part's not satisfied. He could have done otherwise. So we need both to hold. Jones is morally responsible, but Jones, you guessed it, couldn't have done otherwise. Jones 3, we're building. What happens in that case? Jones 3, he's decided to rob the bank. He's deliberated about it. He's decided, walks to the bank, confronts the threatener. The threatener says, "Rob the bank, Jones." Jones goes in and robs the bank. On the basis of what? Well, on the basis of his own decision that he had made. He deliberated, he decided, and he went in to rob the bank. The threat was issued, but he went in to rob the bank. He did so on the basis of his own deliberation and decision making. Could he have done otherwise? Well, here's what we know about Jones 3 as well. We stipulate this. He's reasonable, not like Jones 1. He's reasonable in the following way. Were he have to change his mind at the last minute, the threat would have been enough to get him to act. The threat would have got him to rob the bank. So it looks like all the possibilities open to Jones 3 involve robbing the bank. So he couldn't have done otherwise. And it looks like he's morally responsible because he acted on the basis of his own decision making. Counterexample? Some doubt it. Frankfurt says some may doubt it. They say maybe Jones 3 is, given that he was able to rob the bank on the basis of his own decision making, maybe he had the ability to do otherwise after all. Jones 4 is what we need. We need Jones 4. We need another case. Well, what we do is we get rid of the person threatening as Jones walks into the bank. So there's Jones 4. Here we go. Deliberates, decides, rob the bank, goes to rob the bank. Guess what? Robs the bank. On the basis of what? His own deliberations, decision making. Robs the bank. But here's the deal. Instead of there being a threat as he's going to walk into the bank, you've got this individual hiding behind a bush, maybe. You've got someone that Jones isn't even aware of, who's ready to force him to rob the bank if he were to decide not to at the last minute. You see how this goes? So you don't have that immediate manipulator, but you have it in the... Right? He would have been manipulated to rob the bank had he decided not to. So Frankfurt argues, look, this is the case. Jones could have done otherwise, because if at the last minute he had decided not to rob the bank, this master manipulator he calls Black, poorly named, would have coerced him, would have coerced Jones to rob the bank. So in either case, right, either option open is robbing the bank. And it looks like he's morally responsible because at the last minute he didn't decide to do otherwise. So that individual who was waiting in the wings to rob the bank for whatever reason didn't have to invoke his powers against Jones for. Frankfurt thinks that he succeeded in challenging, in rejecting the principle of alternate possibilities. There have been many challenges to Frankfurt. We'll look at a challenge to Frankfurt, or challenges to Frankfurt in future videos. Just note that Frankfurt's Jones 4 case, perhaps even the Jones 3 case for some, gave rise to a lot of discussion. Some philosophers claiming, look, no, the principle of alternate possibilities, it holds. There's a mistake that Frankfurt must have made. And there's those saying, no, Frankfurt's essentially right. And that led to a lot of debate. That's still going on today. His paper was written in 1969. Seems like a long time ago for many of us. Here we are, 2020. And we're still talking about it. It's still relevant. So that concludes my discussion of Frankfurt's 1969 essay, Alternate Possibilities and Moral Responsibility. There's more I'll say about it in future videos, but we'll get to those when we do. Thank you all for watching, everybody. If you have any questions, please comment below. Otherwise, email me, jedickin@syr.edu. I have other email addresses you can readily find online as well. Okay, thank you all for watching. Bye-bye, everybody.